Olá a todos, boa tarde. Eu sou a professora Marília Mendes Ferreira. Estou aqui para apresentar, né, nosso primeiro evento de uma série que vai ocorrer esse ano em comemoração aos 10 anos do LAC. Né? Então, vocês veem na tela o título da nossa primeira apresentação com uma amiga e parceira, professora Carole MacDiarmid, e eu gostaria de falar um pouquinho, fazer uma breve apresentação do seu trabalho. Né? A professora Carole MacDiarmid é Senior Lecturer and English for Academic Purposes Manager. She works with EAP, Teacher Development of English for Academic Purposes Teachers. She's in the School of Modern Languages and Cultures. She's a lecturer also in TESOL and TEEP and co-program lead of Master's TESOL program. She is responsible for running TESOL and TEEP courses and courses for lectures in English medium instruction. EAP manager for lectures in EAS overseeing professional development, and she set up an online TEAP course. She has published extensively on English for academic purposes and EAP teacher development, articles, books, and chapters. So she has also participated with us in a grant provided by British Council. The project was entitled Facilitating Internationalization in Brazilian Higher Education Context, Developing Expertise in Teaching English for Academic Purposes. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Professor Carole MacDiarmid. Thank you again for accepting the invitation and for being with us here today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be able to join you to celebrate the 10th anniversary of LAC. It's a great achievement and a wonderful section within your school. I had the pleasure of working with Marília and some of her colleagues and students. It was 3 years ago I came to Sao Paulo, and it was wonderful. And I'm going to draw on some of that experience and knowledge that we gained this evening in our talk. So, boa tarde. I'm not sure of my pronunciation, but hopefully that was okay. I'm going to be talking about developing the English for Academic Purposes EAP teacher knowledge base. What is it? What does it include? What are the implications for EAP teachers? And then approaches to developing EAP teacher skills and knowledge. And I'll be looking at how we scaffold and support in some specific areas here. I will be drawing on my experience of working in teacher education with teachers around the world on our TEEP courses, on our academic English courses in Glasgow. We work with teachers at different times in the year with a great range of experience. I know something of your context from Marília in Brazil, and so I'll be looking also specifically at things that you might do, more self-directed teacher development. So there'll be tasks. So however you like to record, pen and paper, laptop, tablet, because I'll give you things to do at various points here. Okay. And so in the first part, very briefly, you'll know this, I'll talk about the EMI context and the relevance of EAP teacher expertise, and then go on to look at conceptualizations of the teacher knowledge base, how it's been explained and demonstrated or articulated, and then what that means for us as teachers. So in brief, we are all familiar, I'm sure, with the drivers for internationalization for academics and teaching, publishing, for students studying, the spread of English for this. We know that there's been quite a lot of research on EAP subject or other subject lecturer needs for their teaching and in research and in publishing. There's been less, though, on what it means for the ELT, EFL teachers and their transition or their role in supporting students or academics in developing their English for EAP, higher education contexts. What are the specific skills and knowledge for this? And for us, the key question is, what do EAP teachers need And how can we address these needs? As I said, I'll draw on some of the research Marilia and I have done and our own practical experiences. It's a very rich field for future development, and so we'll start off looking at some of these areas. So, the EAP teacher knowledge base, aspects of knowledge. So I'm going to give you a practical task now. On the next text slide, you're going to see a text. Take a moment, and when you see it, consider the following. What can you say about this piece of communication? Can you recognize it as a genre, an academic discipline? What's the purpose? And then from that, what are the implications for an EAP teacher? What do we need to be familiar with? You can comment in the comment box, should you wish, or keep a note of it. Don't be afraid. It might be your subject area or it might not, but it's going to come up now. And I'll just give you a minute or two to look at it. Do post any comments. You can be your own impression, your feeling, or anything you can say about this piece here. You can put them in the chat, in the comments box. My first response when I look at it is, oh my goodness, what does that mean? But then I read it again. Okay, I'm going to go through. So the questions are, I'll just go back a slide. What can you say about it? What is it? So Anna, you've got genre as an abstract, yes. What about the discipline, the academic subject? Yeah, it's got loads. Well done, you say statistics. What's the purpose of the communication? What are the implications for an EAP teacher? Okay. So great, we've got descriptions of a test, probably part of a paper. We've got someone saying an abstract, yeah, it's a complete piece of work, isn't it? It's summarizing the content, great here. What academic subject do you think it is? That's kind of a clue at the bottom. Okay, so it says it's from a mathematics there. Yeah, well done. Okay, so we've got this text, which can be quite scary for teachers here if they're not from that subject area. But there are many skills and things that we can develop and that we can show and know just by looking at it, even if we don't know and never get to know in detail the Bayes factor. And this text I chose particularly to exemplify a number of things that we could look at and what we need to think about in terms of an EAP teacher knowledge base. So I went through it and thought, okay, so they're doing different things here. They're introducing the area, they're introducing a problem. There's some definition here. It's telling you about the paper and it's telling you about a test, isn't it? So there's something that's common in this discipline practices about hypothesis testing. They're showing the results and the outcome here. So we've got different ways that genres, subgenres and texts are organized, which are things that we need to develop as an EAP teacher. We've got information here about the knowledge of the discipline and practices. So they present results, they do tests. Okay. So yeah, Marina, you've got EAP teachers need to be aware of statistic methods, even though they won't know it, they need to know that that's something that's one of the practices or common things within the subject area. Okay, we've even got things like citation patterns. When I looked at this first, I thought, oh, I'll change that to APA, but that's my referencing format, not this one. It's MLPI, I think it was. Okay, so we've got different things about a text that we can learn in terms of the overall organization and also the linguistic features within a text and how they work together, which is really important, and also what it can tell us about the discipline. We can look at very specific aspects of linguistic features. I know you can't see the detail in here, but I put that abstract into the academic words and phrases in the COCA Corpus of Contemporary American English. And it shows me discipline specific. Thank you, Ozzy. You've got rhetorical moves and conventions there. This tells me discipline specific vocabulary from their corpus. And you can see lots of yellow, which is highly technical, lots of green, which is less common as well. So we've got it as a very dense academic text, but there are tools that we can use and areas that we can look at there. Okay. So what I want you to think about, you started putting in the chat what that was. If you're a teacher working with an academic or a student that needs to either read or produce that type of text, what sort of things do we need to know as an EAP teacher? What knowledge and skills do we need to develop? You can put up to 3 words in this Menti word generator. You can either scan this with your phone or go to menti.com, put in the code or that link there. So you might be an experienced EAP teacher. What things do you think you need to know? You might be moving into EAP. What do you think you need to know? So one might be, for example, knowledge of genres. Great, William. If you can, you've put genre analysis, corpus linguistics. Yeah, great. If people can put them into the Menti slide, and then I'll share it in a minute with you. And so this is what's coming up from you. It's great. So we've got genre, organization, how genres are organized, linguistic resources. There are specific features of academic communications, written and spoken. We've got plan, relevant. If you're wondering why I'm looking at, I've got it larger on another screen to my right. We need to think about materials. Yes. Okay. So we've got a whole lot of linguistic aspects there about how language and discourse work together to create genres. We've got the rhetorical there. We've got cultural awareness. Yes. And cultures of disciplines, I think, as well. A corpus, if you can, there is some fantastic resources for corpus linguistics there. Okay. Know the academic format. Yeah, what are the expectations in different disciplines, the conventions there? And then helping learners, excellent. We've got learning strategies there as well. Okay, what sort of things can we do to help learners access texts? That's great. I shall share these slides at the end with Gabriella, and you can get sent them if you want. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go back to my main slide. Thank you. And this is a summary. I think you've got many of the things that as a summary of key areas. So knowledge of the discipline, the relevant modes of communications, the registers and genres, what makes something academic, what are the features, rhetorical and linguistic, of specific types of communication. That was an abstract. What about a lecture? What about research, whole research paper? The expectations of how you produce and communicate. And then the lexicogrammatical, the grammar, vocab, how it links together, and rhetorical features, and how they link together to think about the purpose of texts. We've got knowledge of epistemologies. So in for example, maths, there's clearly hypothesis testing and experiments. That's how they go about knowledge building. So text can also tell us about practices and expectations and epistemologies and disciplines. Okay, how do you teach and learn within mathematics? What are common? Because all of these things help us think about what our learners need to do, and so therefore what we do in classes or workshops or one-to-ones with them to facilitate their learning. Okay, and what skills and knowledge do we need to develop as ourselves as teachers? So now I'm going to go on to look at some of the backgrounds. So some of you might be familiar with, because I recognise some people's names here, on conceptualizations of EAP teacher knowledge. So Ferguson, for example, back in '87, talks about ESP, and he is talking, although I think of what I would call as an EAP teacher now, that EAP teachers need specialised knowledge. Okay, not necessarily specialist is different, but a specialised knowledge to work with students, learners, academics in EAP context of disciplinary cultures. So what are the common ways of being? For example, lab reports to demonstrate, seminars to discuss different views and arguments, different disciplines use them in different ways. Problem-based learning, for example, is common in medical education. The linguistic, we've done quite a lot here on genres, discourse, and what are the linguistic features of specific types of communication. A lab report in sciences is quite different from developing an argument in philosophy, for example, or an application in applied linguistics. Again, the epistemologically ways of inquiry and research, for example, experiments. Do they test? Are they exploring an issue in different angles? Are they cumulative disciplines? Are they, circular is perhaps not the right word, but looking at one thing from different angles? Okay, so this is about aspects of teachers' knowledge, their content knowledge. Okay. If we go a bit wider and look at from a teacher teaching perspective, Schulman's talking in a wider context of education. He talks about content knowledge, which would link to the previous slide for Ferguson. Pedagogical knowledge, your general knowledge of teaching and learning about how to manage learners, manage classes if you have classes. Pedagogical content knowledge. What's specific about teaching in EAP? What's going to be the most effective ways, for example, to develop genre awareness knowledge, writing, to develop knowledge and abilities in critical thinking, for example. The curriculum knowledge, the knowledge of the learners and context, these are also important parts of teacher knowledge. So there's a lot that we need to do. More recently, Kohler and Mishra have talked about technical, pedagogic and content knowledge, TPAC. Clearly super important in the last couple of years, but it's about how these interact together and how we most effectively use technology to support and aid learning. So we've got a wider definition here of types of knowledge, but particularly I'm thinking about the content and pedagogy. And then we have something this is from Barleap. Barleap's a UK based, but trying to be increasingly global academic English professional organisation. And we've had different iterations of a framework that talks about knowledge and skills and ability for EAP teachers. The original one looked at academic practices. So what do we know about context, discourse, disciplines, student needs, student learning? What do they need to be able to do? Delivering courses or lessons or workshops. How do we teach? How do we assess? These can all be very specific to EAP and even more specific into specific disciplines. Course design, quality enhancement, professional development, scholarship, about engaging with academic practices. We learn a lot ourselves from our own degrees and study and our own engagement with scholarship and research, and then mentoring, supporting. This was an earlier one. More recently, it's been developed to focus on planning and designing, teaching and learning, assessment, feedback, scholarship and development. But all of these have aspects of knowledge and activities. So knowledge of your content, your pedagogical content knowledge, and then skills to be able to deliver. And underpinned by values of professionalism, development, collaboration, and inclusivity, which I'm sure are very common in many higher education institutions, if not everywhere. Okay. So I've just whizzed through different aspects. What I want you to do now is think about aspects of teacher knowledge, okay? And how confident do you feel about this? How confident are you in knowing about content knowledge of one or a number of disciplines? For example, the genres, lexicogrammatical features, rhetorical patterns. How confident and how knowledgeable are you about different academic disciplines, what they do, what common practices, common genres? I know more about some than others. Okay. How confident are you in your pedagogical knowledge? General teaching pedagogy, pedagogical knowledge for teaching in EAP, and for using technology, and learner needs. And you should be able to see a scale coming up if you go into the Menti side. You'll see these points in the slide. Again, if you go here, you should be able to go to the next slide. I'm hoping that's working. Could someone just tell me if they can get into the slide? And if it's showing. Sorry, can you not share this part just now, Gabriella, because I'm just trying to get to the right presentation. What's my screen? Can you see this? Yeah, I did not see. Okay. Can we go back to my PowerPoint slide? Yeah. Sorry, I'm not sure why the second slide is not presenting. So I might have to abandon that. I'll tell you in a second. Okay. So you should be able to see that, and it should be, yeah, okay. Great, thank you. This is great. So we've got quite a lot here on people's knowledge, content knowledge of genres, lexicogrammar. Oh, okay, yep. Some on disciplines. And two kind of extremes with pedagogical knowledge that might be going up. So very experienced group here we've got, I think, with the range and the development of knowledge. Different people working in different contexts might know more about specific disciplines, might have a very sophisticated knowledge and understanding, I'm sure all the LAC colleagues and within your school certainly do. Okay. And I would say, if I think of my experienced colleagues also in Glasgow, we probably have more of the content knowledge, 1 rather than 2. We learn about disciplines. If we have close contacts with them, it's less researched in terms of explaining to us what it is. We kind of learn about those. Pedagogical knowledge, yes, teachers will be confident in that. And then working on developing, as we get experience, what it means to work in specific disciplines. I imagine pedagogical, the TPAC has shot up for everyone over the last couple of years as well. Learner needs, it's great to see so much of a good focus on learner needs. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go back to my main slides now. Okay. All of those areas are important, but we can all bring things to the table. So EAP teachers come from a wide range of backgrounds and have a lot of resources to draw on. I know sometimes teachers might feel possibly sometimes a bit scared, for example, looking at that maths text if they've never come there before, but people bring a huge amount depending and from a range of backgrounds. So people come with their own different academic disciplines. My original one was politics and economic history before I went into linguistics and language teaching. I have colleagues that work in law and use that effectively. We all have different disciplines, but we can also reflect on our own experiences. We have different first languages, second languages, third languages. That language learning experience is really important, and different qualifications to draw on, and a range of experience. Certainly in my context, a lot of my colleagues were taught in general, although general is difficult and wide, ELT context, and then moved into EAP. Some might have been in general or specific purposes, vocational, professional, and then EAP. Some of my colleagues have just started in EAP and continued from that. Some have been in wider higher education and moved into EAP. So there's a huge amount of expertise that we can draw in amongst our colleagues. My own route was language teaching, general courses, first of all, in Istanbul, that's the Bosphorus, and it's eventually taken me to Glasgow University. So I'm probably more of the general ELT to EAP route myself. But the main point is that we have a lot to draw on, and we can draw on colleagues from a range of disciplines. We have a teaching EAP course, which is going on just now, and I've got colleagues from all of this range of backgrounds studying on the course, and we learn so much from different people because they all bring their different experiences of teaching and learning. So what I want us to think about now is aspects of teacher development and how we can go about this. So there are different approaches. You can, down at the bottom, we've got fellowship awards, courses, workshops, degree qualifications, but there are quite a lot of things people can do that are more self-directed. And one of the reasons I've focused on that is because I know from the work that we did in USP before and I know from my colleagues in Glasgow and through my networks, that people don't always have time or money to do courses and workshops. They want to be able to do things themselves, but you can also learn a lot. So for example, we have reading groups in our department. We do it through special interest groups as well. It's something you can do with your colleagues. Choose an academic article, read and share. I'll show you some slides later on some local networks and international networks, they're all free, which you can join and set up. Scholarship and research is one thing that we can do ourselves by engaging in academic practices to learn and reflect on our practices, and also peer planning and observations. And I'm going to talk a little bit about peer planning and observations in a moment as well. I'm going to show you a couple of examples now of specific things that we do to scaffold and support aspects of developing TEAP teacher knowledge, and then skills, particularly through comments on observations. Okay, so the first example I'm going to talk about is something that we introduced on our Teaching EAP course, but which we develop and can use in designing and investigating any academic course. And we did it because we wanted something that's very practical and usable for teachers. And so we asked people to investigate academic disciplines and practices and produce a report format. The different components that we asked people to consider are the background to the programme. What is it? because this is really about a learner's and academic discipline needs analysis. We ask them to look at genre chains, sequential links of genres and networks, the different genres that students engage in. For example, to write an essay, it's not just writing, it's reading, it's the lecture, it's the seminars, discussion. All of these things work together, and they're very important in academic practice because they show the intertextuality, the importance of that, and how everything we do is kind of interrelated. Okay? We ask people to think about needs analysis questions, so you can gather a certain amount of information from the literature, from websites, but if you have the chance to talk with students and academics, what questions would you ask? What things could you turn into pedagogical activities with your learners? Okay, so I don't know very much about common practices or what people do in this subject area. I could get my students to do a presentation on that, to write about that. We ask people to produce an annotated bibliography, partly because you get a nice summary of relevant academic communications. Is also a specific academic genre. So again, it's that engaging with academic practices. And then we ask them to produce a summary for teachers. All of this is something you can do when you're thinking about investigating a discipline yourself. You can share with colleagues, but also in an accessible format. The sources for this are obviously literature, web sources, peers, students, academics, if you can. So it's a very practical way of scaffolding and supporting and thinking about how do I develop knowledge for a discipline, because it's wide, isn't it? I'm going to show you some excerpts from a student who said I could share this with you in a moment. The benefits we found of this is it can be very self-directed. You get knowledge of the disciplines, the genres, insights into practices. As I said, it's investigation, research-informed practice. It's practically useful for yourself and peers, and you're, as I said, engaging in academic practices. So this is what the format looks like. I have a template document that we can share after for anyone that wants, and this is how it's produced. And this is an example, particularly from an assignment, so you can probably cut out this the left column there. Okay? And here are some extracts. So, for example, the report that I'm drawing this on, the teacher that was investigating works with students in engineering. So she was looking at specific courses, recognizing it's a hard applied disciplines, practicals, protocols. She looked at example genre networks for a class test. So she was looking for a specific group and saying, okay, so they have lectures, discussions, they look at past papers. It's probably the question types, but also sometimes if they're available, actual student texts, the lab reports and study groups discussions. So again, you get insights into what are the common practices, in this case for learners in a specific subject area, and what types of academic communication do they need to engage in. And so then the next question is, okay, so they need to do discussions and lab reports. What does that look like in engineering? And so the next part that we ask people to do is to think about needs, what they know, what other questions they would ask, and then do an annotated bibliography. So for example, this person went and looked at a student laboratory report genre, a genre analysis, to inform her practice and her teaching, develops her knowledge of the subject area, her content knowledge, but can also provide insights into practical applications and teaching. The content of this is not the important point, it's the areas that we get people to investigate really here. This is the document I was talking about. I'm afraid I'm used to Zoom where I can share things in the chat, and I didn't realize I wouldn't be able to do this, but we can get this sent out to you. It's the framework if you wish to use that as a way of scaffolding and thinking about types of things you would need to know in an academic when you're investigating a subject area or discipline. Another example of how we can scaffold and focus development of teacher knowledge is about features of academic communication, lexicogrammatical and rhetorical features, and particularly, as I keep saying, how they work together. And we ask students on the course to do a poster and a worksheet. You may or may not want to go as far as putting it together in a poster, but we chose this because it's engaging with a specific genre in the academy, and also something that we know in our academic professional lives within EAP, that it's something we can practically take to conferences ourselves. So again, you learn about disciplines, the linguistic realizations, the learner's disciplines. Again, it's engaging with knowledge and specific genres. And as I said, taking things to conferences and or sharing with peers. And I'm going to show you again just what a poster output looks like. And the reason I got this one is because, sorry, I'll show you in a minute, this is an output from a course, but a teacher took to an EAP context. So she looked at building argument through addressing the reader and looked at very specific linguistic features and rhetorical organization. Okay. The specific task that we ask to show, if you wanted to replicate this, and we're asking people to demonstrate an ability to analyze, differentiate linguistic rhetorical features, is selecting. So in the student before was looking at engineering, and when she got to the poster, she chose a lab report, and that was her academic text, and she chose a student genre rather than an expert professional genre. A specific framework for analysis, that might be a register analysis, it might be looking at meta discourse, it might be looking at linguistic items. In our reference list at the end, Marilia and I came up with some EAP toolkits, and we give a SFL framework analysis for looking into a text, which you can could be useful there. We asked them to identify the purpose of the text, because the purpose of the text then shows how it's the audience, the organization, the linguistic features, and as I said, relevant rhetorical, how it's structured. It might be stages, moves, overall organizations, or very, very fuzzy if it's study group discussions, and relevant linguistic and rhetorical items. Again, this can inform our teaching, because we can think about what is it that we need to know and draw learners' attentions to help them produce and process texts. Okay. As I said, this is the example poster. My aim here is not to go through the content, but more to illustrate things people can do. And then they were thinking about content knowledge, but I'm also thinking about how do we develop observation, pedagogical skills. And one thing that we can do is by watching, reflecting on our own practice, but also observing colleagues. So, sorry, I'm just doing something with another slide. I want you to think for a moment, what makes an observation of teaching and learning a positive experience for you? And who and what can you observe? Observations can be scary, but I guess it's because it's showing yourself in public. But we do want to think about them and how we can enhance that and make it a positive experience here. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use the observation cycle in Glasgow to help people focus on their own skills, and particularly within EAP contexts here. Yeah, you can see other people's techniques and you learn from them. And that is actually one of the reasons why we have enhanced our observation cycle. I did a little bit of research with our teachers. We do observations in the summer of our teachers, trying to find out what they found is useful, less useful, and so on. And one of the things we found was that the people who were doing the observing were having a fantastic time. We were getting the opportunity to see lots of expertise and development and different ways of working with learners, which was fine. But the teachers, who, and some were less experienced, were not getting the same experience. So we were trying to think of how can we widen that out? We want our observations to be supportive. We want them to be about sharing and developing expertise. in our contents, we want them to be EAP specific and developmental. And I've got for EAP and online, and I've put still because I think we're still developing our expertise, but we've obviously learned a lot about teaching online. So what do? Well, we have a range of approaches to observation. We try and encourage peer observation. If we've got time, we try and cover a class or a lesson so that someone can go, or people can record, either record their face-to-face classroom or now on Zoom there. We have experienced colleagues will come and observe, or teachers can go and observe an experienced colleague. Okay, it can be both ways there as learning opportunities. We have blind observations with collaborative opportunities for collaborative planning. So in here, rather than observe the lesson, we'll have discussions about dialogue about the lesson plan, the decisions and questions. The teacher will then go and teach and then come back and debrief. So there's a dialogue building about the observation and the teaching and the aims. And here it's all really about giving people an opportunity to reflect and think about what they're doing and how it went, and then how they might develop. We don't always have time to do this all the time there. Feedback, William, yes, very important in teacher development, how it's given and received, I think, there. We try and encourage collaborative planning. In our summer, we have a lot of teachers working together on the same course and they're teaching the same thing. So we try and get them to plan together, then talk about their lessons. And it can be for a class, but we also encourage people to think about, they can be observed, although not necessarily always with someone in the room, on one-to-one consultations. They might talk about what they're going to do and then debrief. They might put a camera in the side of the room just to do that and then think about what they're doing, because that's such a large part of a lot of our context, and I think in other contexts where you might have one-to-ones. We've also recently started doing feedback on written practices, and this comes from a colleague in Edinburgh University who said, okay, so assessment and feedback's huge. Let's look not only at the lesson, but what we do with our feedback. And so that's structured around the idea of a teacher will have pieces of work that they want to give back to students. It might be written, it could be recordings of speaking. They'll think about how they're going to assess the work, what feedback they're giving, what areas to prioritise, discuss it with a peer or an experienced colleague if they're new to the area, do it and then debrief. So looking beyond the prototypical lesson. It can also, if you have the opportunity, be observations of academics in a discipline. What do they do? How do they do it? What are common practices? So we're thinking about observation in the broadest sense here. And our cycle works something like this. We have a briefing of what we're going to do and what our aims are. We have some pre-observation dialogue. It may be with their plan, their materials, the lesson. And I say lesson because it might be one-to-one. It might not even go to the lesson. It might be them telling me about the lesson, a reflection by the teacher and the observer if they've been into a lesson or seen a recording, and then a meeting follow-up. So we have this kind of reflective cycle where people can think about what they want to do, what they did, how it worked, and then reflexivity and thinking where they would move on to. So teaching as its process can be really important for thinking about our skills and how we are actually going to do something. Okay. Video feedback, yes, Jose, that's a great idea, is giving that as a possibility. And if teachers are happy to, sharing recordings, either of excerpts themselves that they want to discuss, and using that as a type of stimulated recall for discussions, or even for the teacher to watch themselves. We had it's called a swivel device that we've used, where people could put it in the corner of their room and record face live classes. This was pre-COVID that we were doing. And we did it so that the observer didn't have to go into the class, because sometimes that's intrusive. But actually, the teachers who used it said, oh, I watched my lesson again, and it was really interesting. It gives me a time to reflect there. Okay. And so what do we do with all this knowledge? Well, ideally, we'd be wanting to disseminate it and sharing it with peers and colleagues. And I'm going to show you 3 examples briefly of different networks. We have something called EAP in the North. It's a picture of Scotland up in the hills there. And it's a local network that I do with other colleagues in Scotland. And it's basically, now it's get a Zoom link. Before it was, can you book a room? And get people to come together, and we choose different areas. If you go onto the site, there's some information about how we set it up. So it might be something very simple and say, okay, anyone want to come together and talk about how we deal with assessment feedback, how we teach academic writing. It might be getting a speaker to do a talk and then a discussion. It might be a series of talks. We've done that a few times and said, okay, so we're interested in technology, for example, and ask people, do you want to give a short 10-minute talk? So it gives different people opportunities to share their practice. It's really easy to set up there. There are wider networks. So as I've mentioned, I'm part of Bali. We're an institutional member and I'm quite involved in it. But in the last couple of years, my colleague Annalise overseen the setting up of special interest groups, the SIGs, and there are a range of them now. They're all free. Anyone can join. Obviously, everything is online, and I think this will stay the way for quite a long time. It's much more inclusive and we get wider audiences. So, for example, there's a testing, assessment and feedback SIG, there's creative disciplines, academic literacies, doctoral education, there's a law SIG that's just started. I do the teacher education and EAP. There's testing and assessing listening. There's a leadership and management one. There's a TEL technology SIG. There's a social justice SIG. I know they're starting a SEM one. So the links are here and well worth you going if you're interested in any of those areas. They're fairly regular events. They're invariably online and free. And there's some discussion lists. Something you can join in from afar, but you might also want to, if you've got a network in Brazil, set up your own ones. And another one is a global network, which my colleague Nicola Galloway in Glasgow oversees. It's general English, but also one specifically for EMI, which has a whole host of facilitators and research and interesting articles within that. That is under construction and development, but it is the links are here. So what I've been thinking about is teacher knowledge base. What aspects we need to develop as EAP teachers, some different practical approaches for developing this and how we might go about it. If you've got any questions or comments, you can add them to the Menti slide. Anything that was new, interesting, something that you'd like to explore more, you can add there, and that's me just about done. I think I'm fairly well on time there. But you can either add questions to the chat or you can add them and any comments or feedback to the Menti slide. As I say, we can also add them into the chat if you have questions. Just show you the last two slides and then come back to this. So there are links here for networks, observation criteria, and selected references here. I can't see anything coming up on the question and answer slide, but if you have questions, you want to put them in the chat, you can do so. And I'll stop now. We don't need to share that screen anymore. Yep.
So that's what I was about to say. Put on your questions if you have any questions about the talk. Thank you for it. It was very, very great, very instructive about the different networks and with the activities. I thought it was very interactive, Carole. Thank you. So we were anxious to hear from you about the questions, whether through the YouTube chat or if you want to use the Menti. I myself didn't have time to do this. Correct. But I do have one question while people start thinking about their question. When you said about the SIGs in BALIP, which is the special interest group, don't you have to be a member of BALIP to participate in the SIGs?
No, you don't. So you can be an individual or institutional member of BALIP, but for the special interest groups, you don't need to be a member of BALIP. If you are a committee member, if you stand for election for one of the committees, you need to be, at the moment, a BALIP member, but not to take part in the SIG activities. So they're a great resource, really. They're all still developing because they're quite new, but we have, all of them, I think, have got resources on there that people can access, and you see the talks. I think all of them tweet, so you can follow them on Twitter and find out what's going on. I when anyone opens, I tend to join the discussion list and the link just to see. I can't always go to everything, but you can go to them. Yep.
Good to know, because I think this is EAP teacher development is an area in Brazil that needs to grow, and I think these networks can be very useful for people to start, approaching the area. Let's do some questions. Someone is asking about if you are sharing the PowerPoint.
Yes, I'll send it to you if that's okay.
And also you're going to put the link to the document.
Yeah, I'll send that to you, and then you can distribute. Okay.
Yeah, and the link to the documents that she mentioned during the presentation, the link will be given in the YouTube description, because this is going to be in our YouTube channel.
Okay.
Okay.
I can see on the Menti slide someone talk about interested to know about teacher skills, particularly learner needs, diversity and expectations. And yeah, I think that's a growing area. I'm learning all the time. I've been in higher education context since probably the mid 1990s. I'm probably somewhat older than most of you here, but I'm still learning about different contexts that students work in. I do find it highly instructive to use my learners where they have information they sometimes don't know, depending on whether they're new to an area or not, to try and make connections with academics, even going and saying, can I come to your lectures? Do you mind me asking some questions? Looking through their course VLEs and Moodles, and then from the literature as well. Obviously, if you're in an academic context, it can be a bit easier to get connections, and different universities will work in different ways. We're fortunate in Glasgow, we have a big learning and teaching conference. I go there because I find all the people that are interested in learning and teaching in the wider university. I think there's quite a lot of transferable skills and the pedagogic things that you can bring, but the more you know about academic communications and discourse, you can start to think about what skills do students need to process and produce these types. A genre and discourse approach is very common, I would say, in EAP, because that's what we produce large text as genres.
And do you have more questions? Because I do have one, but I will give the ones from Mentimeter will be more interesting. Do you? No?
There's nothing else on that.
From your experience with EAP teacher education in Glasgow and in other places, what are the main challenges that a beginner in this field, maybe an experienced teacher, but starting in EAP, what would be the most common challenges you have observed in your practice?
I think there's an initial certain amount of fear, is possibly too strong a word, but we teach accounting and finance students the efficient market hypothesis, and for some that's quite a bit. But I think that initial unfamiliarity with the types of communication, and then what we are trying to do is get people thinking, yeah, but you bring a lot here. You can develop your knowledge. You can look at a text, a genre, and say, you can recognize what it is, and then start going deeper. And I think then it's about developing linguistic knowledge. A lot will depend on the background, though, of the teacher and the level of linguistic, applied linguistic knowledge, basically, that they'll know. If that's new, we can develop those skills and knowledge. The other big thing, I think, is familiarity with academic skills and practices in disciplines. And I think that's true for everyone, because I think there's less information out there about it. And that's a lot is about getting familiar. We work with we often have new teachers in the summer who are only with us for a short time. So there's a limit to how much they can go out, but it's getting, how do we do the needs analysis with learners and then disseminate it so they have a real understanding of what students do. There's a fair amount that people can do with reflecting on their own experiences. I don't know that people, well, I think people can probably do much more with that themselves there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things is exactly this confidence that if you're already a teacher and you can build upon on what you already have. And another question would be, how is the interaction between the EAP teachers and the expert teachers, the teachers from the field?
From the other subject? Completely depends. We have in our section in our university, we have subject-specific courses, and we have some very strong links with some schools because they have lots of students in those areas, and or we've got some very good connections because we've met up some of the academics through a student or through a conference in the university. It's a big job. It's a constant one to try and keep connection with academics, partly because, if anything, heads of subject and school rotate, so it's different people. They're busy, we're busy. I know one of the things a lot of our teachers say, but people don't reply, and I'm like, I know, they're busy marking or they're busy doing things. But I think it's about trying our very best to get, Annalie, my colleague, and I talk about getting out of the house, trying to get out of our unit and to try and go and talk to people and be part of the university, even if it's going to university events there. It's not easy, but I think it makes for the best courses and the best provision there.
Yeah, that's what we do in LACI too here. We try to reach out these institutes and talk to professors and because everybody's busy, and we know it's a priority, but until I used to say, until something happens in the lab, with the mice.
I think the other thing that's important as well is, I think EAP practitioners, certainly in my context, we do a lot. They can be very innovative. They're interested in their students. We don't do enough dissemination of our practices, writing, going to conferences, or maybe going to conferences but not writing things up and disseminating. And I think we need to do more of that, so that when someone says, why are you good? Why are you important? We can go, here's our evidence. For me, knowledge is currency in a university. So we need to be able to do more of that and encourage our teachers to do more. So they're taking it out. And if there are higher education or university-wide or learning and teaching events, going to those as well and showing why what we do is relevant, it's kind of getting noticed and becoming valued there.
I think this comment leads to José Belém Neto's question about here, how EAP teachers could show their values to their institutions, given that often the role of teaching writing or academic communication is given to those who are specialists in the field.
Okay. So the first part in terms of value, I think, is disseminating, sharing our evaluation of our practice. So doing scholarship, doing so what's the impact of what we do? How can we research that ourselves? Teaching is the second part, saying that the role is often given to the academics, the specialists, rather than the EAP. I think that's about where we can try and work together. I've seen some very interesting projects where someone from an EAP department has worked with a subject lecturer, and they've both worked, for example, assessed a piece of work to look at what they both bring to the piece of work, to show that value, and then share it with other people. It's finding willing people, I think. And I think there's probably a practical thing of what can we do to support academics who they know the subject, but maybe not the linguistic specialist aspects or knowledge to give feedback in, how we can support them as well, because realistically, it's unlikely in many contexts you're going to get lots and lots of institutional support for really good embedded EAP practice. I don't think so. It's what can we do to scale up and then share practice and support academics in those areas.
Yeah.
I know it's easier said than done, but
yeah, but that's a very good point. How to help these professors, advisors to mediate, to be literacy brokers. So to sum up, I think EAP teachers, they have a fundamental role
absolutely
in the university, in the process of internationalization of education, and definitely they should be valued. And for that, I think continuous professional development is very important, and networks are very important.
And really showcasing what we do, because we can kind of get a bit hidden. We're there doing all the hard work.
Exactly. Definitely. That's it. Well, if we there is just one question here from Gabriela to finish. From your experience, what is the most common professional transition for EAP teachers? What would be good strategies to ease this transition?
Okay, so in the context I work in and that I'm familiar with, and I have to say a lot of in the UK or Brazil, and with some colleagues in the Far East as well, general English to EAP, because you get lots of very experienced or people that are qualified in general English teaching, not least because at the moment there are still very few professional qualifications or courses in teaching EAP. More are coming, but there's less that way. So I would say that's the general transition there. In terms of higher education to EAP, I do see that colleagues that have maybe work in student support or student learning. My own context, I see more, or my experience is more general to EAP. Not to say though, and I think this is going to be a growing trend, that people start in EAP. I've got some colleagues who started, they came off their CELTAs and their first courses and went into some practical courses and classes and have just developed their expertise in those areas. And teaching a general course is much less familiar for them. They need to learn that if they move to that context. In terms of to ease the transition, I think it's about thinking about scaffolding and supporting and targeting what you need to know. And I think that's why I chose those two examples. So one is trying to find more about student needs and disciplines. If I'm squinting, it's because the sun's coming right into my eyes. Okay. And the other one is then slowly skilling up and developing their linguistic knowledge so that they can think about and work with what students need to do to produce and process text, so that in that way. Okay. And draw on strategies and practices if you have a pedagogic background.
Well, thank you, Carole. If you do have more questions, maybe you can, through the Mentimeter, send them to Carole. I'd like to thank you for all who attended this first session to celebrate our 10 years. LAC is a laboratory of academic literacy, and we provide tutoring sessions, courses on academic writing in Portuguese as first language, French and English as second language. Also academic writing courses in Portuguese, in English, and in French. And again, Carole, thank you very much for this talk, and hope to see you again soon, face to face or online.
Well, or online, yes. And please, people do join the SIGs, and it's been lovely, and it's been lovely to see the names that I recognise from my visit before and from our BILEAP conference in the chat. Okay, thank you again. Have a great series of events. Okay,
thank you very much. Thanks. And have a nice weekend, everybody.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.